All right, so today we're really diving deep into this whole world of human error.
It sounds a little, I don't know.
Yeah, a little dry maybe.
Yeah, we'll try it first.
But stick with us.
It gets good.
It gets really, really fascinating because it's not just, oh, we made a mistake. It's like, why do we make mistakes? And we're looking at these two books by the same author, and they're packed, really packed with useful information.
Yeah, and the thing that really hooked me, I think, at the beginning was, the author's story, right? He starts out, he's a mechanical engineer working in oil and gas, and then his dad, who's, a mechanic, dies in a car accident.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's kind of this big event that kind of puts him on this journey of trying to figure out, especially in these high-risk, fields, like what really causes these errors.
Right. Talk about a life-changing kind of thing to propel you on this journey.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it makes you realize this isn't just some theory. Like, he's been there.
Yeah.
He's experienced it.
Yeah, and he goes on, and he even mentions this OSHA stat.
Okay.
That 80% of workplace incidents are tied to, in some way, human error. 80%. See, that's what I'm saying. 80%.
Mm-hmm.
That's huge.
Yeah.
So, it's not just those big, factory floor things. It's like across the board. This is impacting all of us.
Totally.
So we're all human. We all make these mistakes.
Yeah.
But this is where I thought it got really interesting. He talks about moving away from focusing on this human error and going more toward human factors, right?
Right. He says it's like blaming a thermometer for a heat wave.
Okay.
Like it's just reflecting what's happening.
It's not actually causing the heat.
It's not the thermometer's fault.
Right. And so it's the same thing he's saying with errors. Oftentimes the person who is making the error is just reacting to a whole bunch of other things.
It's not that they weren't paying attention. It's like, why weren't they paying attention? Like, what was the context? What was going on?
Totally, exactly.
What systems were in place or not in place?
Yeah, and that's where he talks about these situations that are prone to errors.
Okay.
And so it's not to say that people are, off the hook. But it's, he really emphasizes that a lot of times these situations are very predictable and, more importantly, avoidable.
If you know what to look for.
If you know what to look for.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay, so to help us understand this, he lays out this whole human performance model. And I'll be honest, when I first read it, it was like, oh, this seems very technical. Like he's using terms like modes of human performance, error-prone situations, And it kind of, I don't know.
Yeah, your eyes glaze over.
Like it's a little glaze over, right? But then he brings in these examples, and I was like, okay, now I'm getting it.
Yeah, totally. Like the one about the technician who inflates a small tire.
Yes.
Because they think that it's, a regular car tire.
Yeah.
And it's just just because you're experienced doesn't mean you're immune to these things, right?
Right, exactly.
Like we can all fall prey to this.
And then that one about the train crash, the one in London.
Yeah.
Where the signaling, like the new and old systems weren't talking to each other properly.
Right.
It's like, oh, okay. So all these little factors.
Yeah.
It's not just one thing. Right?
It's so easy for that to happen.
Yeah. It's not just one thing. It's this whole confluence of events and things.
Yeah. And what I really appreciate is he gives us ways, kind of a formula, if you will, to kind of diagnose this. So he's saying, we look at how work is designed. And we look at how people are trained.
Mm.
And then we even look at organizational culture.
So it's not just the individual. It's zooming out.
The whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's how individuals can be set up for these errors. But then he goes on in this other book. It's like, now let's look at the bigger systems that people are operating in.
Yeah.
And that's where I think it gets really interesting. And this is where we kind of transition into this next book.
The second book, Biases, A Journey of a Non-Behavioral Scientist. This one really, I don't know, it really resonated with me because it's kind of like, okay, we took all that stuff that we were just talking about with human error and, situations prone to error. And then it's like, okay, now let's zoom out and let's look at how does this actually play out in the real world, in teams and companies and even, society as a whole. And
I love how the author kind of positions himself to his background because he's like, I'm an engineer.
Right.
I kind of came at this, reluctantly. I love that.
Yeah, it wasn't supposed to be this way.
Yeah, and so I was like, okay, well, if this guy can get it, I can get it.
Totally. And he does a really good job of kind of connecting the dots between our own personal biases and then how that kind of bleeds into the cultures that we create at work and then how that impacts like I said, everything.
And it's like these layers, right? Because you have what's written down, like this is how you do the thing.
Right.
But then there's this whole other layer of like the unspoken rules.
Totally.
The assumptions, this is how we do things around here.
Yeah. And that's where I think, he really brings in the whole leadership aspect of this. And it's so interesting because he digs into, different leadership styles, the way we communicate or don't communicate, if we're even working with the same values, all that kind of stuff. It's like, are we setting people up for, success? Or are we setting them up for, honestly, errors?
One of the things that really stuck out to me, this idea of human first.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, well, yeah, duh.
Right.
Like, obviously. But then when you really dive into it, it's like, oh, most companies are not doing that.
No. I mean, it's one thing to say, be nice to your employees, but he really goes beyond that. And he's saying, no, you need to actually genuinely prioritize. When your employees feel safe, when they feel heard, when they feel like they can contribute, they can speak up, that's when you're going to get less errors, more innovation, more people, wanting to actually be at the company and stay there. So it's kind of like, it's a win-win.
And what I love is he doesn't just say like, be more human. He gives you these actual tools. Like there's a whole toolkit in the back of the book. I mean, he's got like, videos and websites and this whole like, almost like a diagnostic that you can kind of take back to your own company and be like, all right, where are we messing up? What can we actually do about it?
Yeah, and I love how he kind of walks you through this process of doing what he calls layered diagnostics. Mm-hmm. And it's really just like getting different perspectives within an organization, because a lot of times, what leadership sees and what's actually happening on the ground are two very different things. So getting those different layers of, input and ideas and experience.
Yeah.
And then he talks about having like these process sessions where you're really like, kind of hashing things out and challenging assumptions and, figuring out what are we going to do about this together.
He even talks about using games to help people, especially in these, high pressure kind of jobs, to like make better decisions.
Right.
It's like a flight simulator, but for your brain.
Exactly.
Which I thought was just brilliant.
Yeah. Because it's one thing to, sit here and read about biases or read about, how we make decisions under pressure, but it's a whole other thing to actually like experience it.
Right.
In a safe way.
Yeah, where you're allowed to like fail and learn from it.
Right, exactly. Yeah, so good.
Okay, speaking of, learning from experience, this is where he brings in kind of a sobering example. He talks about the Piper Alpha oil rig disaster. It really makes you think.
It does.
Because it wasn't just one thing.
Right.
It wasn't like one machine broke or one person wasn't paying attention. It was this whole series of events. Like the system itself was primed for something bad to happen.
And even with like all of the safety things in place,
right,
it still happened, which is, I think, kind of the big takeaway from what this author's point is.
Right.
He's not saying, like, get rid of all the technology, like, go back to the old way. It's like, no, we need to, like, acknowledge the human element in all of this.
Yeah.
Because we can't take it out of the equation.
You can't engineer it out. We can't. Yeah. And it's, like you said, like, even with the best intentions, we're going to make mistakes.
We're human.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
But how do we, I don't know, it's like we get so caught up in just trying to be efficient and like checking the box and, meeting the deadline that it's like, are we even being effective?
Exactly.
Are we actually like creating something? I don't know.
Yeah. Meaningful, are we?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's where like these hidden costs come in, right?
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. The burnout and the lack of innovation and, all these other things that might not, cause a Piper Alpha.
Right.
But they're still like slowly, kind of chipping away at our time, our resources.
Yeah.
Even just like, people's morale.
Right. Yeah. So it's not just about avoiding the bad thing. It's like, what are we actually aiming for?
Right. Exactly.
What does good look like?
Yeah. What does good look like? And, the author, he says it's not just about like preventing the negative, but it's like, how do we actually like support the positive? Mm-hmm. How do we support people doing their best work?
Okay. Yeah.
Imagine like going to work and you feel safe to contribute. Your ideas are valued. You feel like you're a part of something.
It's a good feeling.
Right.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how do we get there?
Well, I mean, it takes effort.
Okay.
But he gives us those tools,
Yes.
like we talked about,
Okay.
those diagnostics, those, process sessions,
Yeah.
those are key.
Okay.
We have to be willing to like look at our organizations with a fresh set of eyes
Okay.
and really listen
Yes.
to what people are experiencing
At all levels.
at all levels. Exactly.
Just the top.
Not just the top. Right. Yeah. And to have those conversations,
Right.
that might be, a little uncomfortable.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. About, what's working, what's not.
Yeah, and actually do something about it.
And actually do something about it.
Right?
Right. It's great to talk about it. But
Right, exactly. Exactly.
we got to walk the walk.
Yeah. Love it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's not about being perfect, it's about being, I don't know, like always striving.
Always learning. Yeah.
To be better. Right.
Yeah. And acknowledging,
Yeah.
that we're going to make mistakes.
And that's okay.
That's okay. It's about creating that
I learned from them.
culture. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Love it. Well, on that note, I think this has been a really fascinating dive
Yes.
into human error
So good.
and human factors.
Yes.
And how we can kind of, I don't know, create a better
A better workplace.
workplace, a better,
A better world.
well, for ourselves, right?
That's it.
So thank you for joining me
Yes. Thank you for having me.
on this deep dive.
It was fun.
And to our listener, think about these things as you go back to your own life.
Yeah. What are those systems?
What systems are you a part of?
What are your biases?
What are your biases? Yeah. How can we all kind of do better here?
And create that culture. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. That's it for us.
Okay.
We'll see you next time.